All right. Thank you, everyone. And hello. My name is Chelsea Tibbetts. You've tuned into I Feel Your Pain, the downside of being a helper with the Wisconsin Women's Health Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to make this webinar a priority. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Ann Rolling, Counseling Manager with Children's Hospital of Wisconsin, as our speaker. Dr. Rolling will be presenting on the importance of self-care, including concrete examples for application to your personal lives. We sincerely appreciate her sharing her knowledge, experience, and expertise with us. As a Wisconsin Women's Health Foundation program partner, we encourage you to take this time to sit back, relax, and take a moment for yourself in the new year. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ann Rolling.
Hello, everyone. I was just sharing with Chelsea that this is my first kind of go around with a webinar. So if it's a little rocky at times, I apologize in advance for that. I present with kind of a more conversational style, so I understand people can tune in with questions and things. So definitely feel free to make any comments along the way, and we will try to address them as they come up. So, just to give you a little background for myself, have worked with kids as a therapist for many years, and then became a supervisor for a counseling team, first in Racine and then in Milwaukee, and kind of was able to shift my focus from working directly with families to then taking care of those people who do that work. And so I've never really completely given up that counseling role or caregiver role, and it could help shift my focus towards working around vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. So, but I just wanted to start off by kind of giving you guys a little bit of humor to kind of I pulled off a bunch of different things that I found online and kind of combined a bunch of different lists. And, one of my personal favorites is, considering Red Bull to be a part of a balanced diet. So if any of these signs kind of apply to you, definitely you're not alone. I think also, too, thinking about sleeping more at work than at home, or considering a 40-hour week of vacation, those are pretty common complaints of a lot of people who are overworked and feeling like they don't have balance in their lives and really needing some support and boundaries. A lot of case files being read at night for light bedtime reading, I'm sure, and taking a long time, even when you do take a vacation, to actually feel relaxed, and then you go back to work and you feel like you're being punished because there's so much there waiting for you that no one else took care of while you were gone. So these are just, again, kind of some things to kind of think of as you consider, where you fall on the spectrum of experiencing burnout, compassion fatigue, all of those things. So, those of us who are caregivers, and I understand there's a lot of different roles that people on the webinar may be coming from, but, in I think each of our careers, we have some tools that we utilize in working with the families that we serve, but our primary tool is ourself. And so just like a carpenter or, construction worker or, any other person using a lot of, handheld tools would take good care of them, we're obligated to take care of ourselves in that way so that we can provide the best quality of care for people. So I wanted to start off with defining the different terms. I know sometimes there's some confusion about, which is which. A lot of them are used interchangeably. There are a few subtle differences that I wanted to highlight, and just kind of talk through that real quickly before getting into sort of the meat of the presentation. Vicarious trauma, the definition that I found that I really spoke to me the most was this top one, where it talks about it being a process of change. And it happens because you care about other people who have been hurt, and then you feel committed or responsible to help them. And so it's kind of a combination of those three elements that really lead to this cumulative process. And as it notes down at the bottom, it impacts you psychologically, physically, spiritually, kind of, every aspect of yourself is impacted by it. Secondary traumatic stress, in my mind, takes vicarious trauma to a higher level. So it's really considered a syndrome of symptoms, and it's extremely similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. So, the new criteria for PTSD and the DSM do allow for indirect exposure to trauma to qualify you for that diagnosis. And so it's kind of, essentially looking at that list of symptoms, it would be very similar to that, a lot of hypervigilance, avoidance behavior, numbing, all those different types of symptoms would be to that level. So you could be re-experience the trauma that you've heard about indirectly from your clientele, or if you've had a personal trauma, you can re-experience your own trauma. It can get kind of triggered and set that off as well. So there's kind of a possibility of having this affect you in multiple ways. So, but I would consider it kind of a more severe end of the spectrum than vicarious trauma itself. And then compassion fatigue, relates to the stress, relates to the exhaustion, the fatigue, and kind of the overall decline in your ability to experience joy or having feelings and caring for others and things along those lines. So it's similar, but I think compassion fatigue doesn't necessarily have to be from helping traumatized people. It could be just, even if you don't work a lot with traumatized people, just eventually over time you can experience the fatigue of just being constantly the caregiver, the helper in the relationship. And so it kind of overlaps with those in that way. And it can be viewed as a less stigmatizing term because it doesn't have the word trauma in the heading of it. So a lot of people prefer to use it that way. However, I tend to lean towards using vicarious trauma because I'm of the mindset that we should name it for what it is. And so, if we're talking really about working with folks with trauma experiences and that we are experiencing trauma through those folks, then we should really kind of be accurate and, call it that. But, if you prefer to use compassion fatigue as the term that you want to use, feel free to do so. And I think, like I said, they're virtually interchangeable. So I think there's a lot of people who would kind of, wouldn't split hairs on that. And then the last term that's commonly thrown into the mix is burnout. And burnout is a little different in that it's really just about overall job satisfaction. It relates towards, overall workplace stress. You can feel a lot of exhaustion, disconnection. You may be dealing with complex cases and situations or difficult situations a lot, and so that can overwhelm you. But it's, it could happen to anyone in any type of workplace, so it's not necessarily specific to trauma or even to caregiving. I mean, you could work at Kinko's and, experience burnout on the job or at the post office or things along those lines. So, but oftentimes they go hand in hand with vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, because, there's, if your employer or your organization isn't doing a good job and really managing itself on a administrative level, they're probably not going to be taking good care of people in terms of their trauma and experiences as well. And so a lot of people may be experiencing elements of both. So that's why I wanted to include that in there. So I know a lot of people, when they think about trauma, it can seem like, you're talking about climbing Mount Everest, or I don't even know what mountain this particular picture is of, but, I really liked it because it really speaks to just kind of how fierce it can feel and how overwhelming it can feel to people when you're kind of thinking about it and talking about it, and, you feel the accumulation of all the stories and situations that you've heard about through your clients and your families. But the perspective that I like to take is that, it's really much more about these tiny little experiences that you've had along the way rather than the big, overwhelming situation, that kind of stands out amongst the crowd. So, and I really like this quote from Robert Service. Set the mountain ahead of you that wears you out. It's the grain of sand in your shoe. And, part of why I like it, because I think it is a little more accurate depiction about all the hundreds of traumas that we experience throughout our careers, through our families, but it's also makes it more of an achievable thing, because if you're talking about climbing Mount Everest, nobody's going to make time for that. But if you can find a way to clean out a few grains of sand out of your shoe on a regular basis, that's an achievable sort of goal that you can have for yourself. So I also wanted to throw this in there. I'm not somebody who likes to kind of throw a lot of the academic sort of biology, sort of heavy-duty stuff into my presentations, because I think there are other folks who do a far better job of describing all of that stuff. But I wanted to kind of highlight again that, we're talking about this impact in your body in so many different ways, and just about every aspect of our body is impacted by our trauma experiences. And, as I started to learn personally about, the impact that trauma has on us physically, and particularly around brain structure and brain development when you're talking about children, and I started to think about all the impact of vicarious trauma. Actually, I had that thought, like, so is my job giving me brain damage? Am I, being impacted in this same way? Is this something I should be worried about, thinking about? How do I cope with that and, keep myself from, becoming, having, experiencing all these different problems physically and emotionally and all that kind of stuff, just the way our families do. So, in the process that I think really highlights how this happens is that, we have these mirror neurons in our body that, is part of being a very social creature. And, when we see other people's emotions and body movements, we tend to just naturally imitate those things and start to experience those sorts of things. So if you think of contagious laughter or see someone yawning and you start to yawn, those are the processes that we're talking about. And so especially for somebody who has a lot of natural empathy, like, most good caregivers do, it's that mirroring, actually makes us more vulnerable. So, we're kind of get caught up into the same emotional stuff that our families are and our clients are dealing with. So, and I recently heard it described as living in an ocean of stress emotions. And to me, that really struck me that if you kind of think about yourself, whether you're treading water or swimming or floating in this huge ocean, and it's all these stress emotions surrounding you all the time, that's a pretty striking visual image of what it's like every day to work with our families every day, all day. So sorry, this list is just some things of, the ways that vicarious trauma can start to impact you. So things to kind of look out for in yourself and your colleagues, are things like detachment and blaming others, loss of safety, having difficulties with your emotions, getting easily frustrated or anxious. Avoidance is a big one. That's kind of a hallmark trauma symptom in and of itself. There's definitely a whole host of these. You can also include loss of sense of hope and feeling kind of helpless, loss of meaning, I think is a big one, kind of that sense of spirituality and your underlying kind of view on life and meaning of life can be very impacted by this work. And so there's also a lot of people who have the physical complaints, problems sleeping, nightmares, exhaustion, being hypervigilant. And then there's a lot of people who can't turn it off. They just kind of take their work home and they find themselves overworking and working, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, pretty much every week. And that definitely will tear things down. So, again, another question that commonly pops up with this is, why would this happen? And I think it happens for some very good reasons. One, overall, it happens to people who are good at their jobs. So because you're good at your job, you're more impacted by it. You take it home, and it resonates with you a bit more. Having, again, that really strong sense of empathy and caring also impacts it. And then more than ever, within our culture, in our society, we are busy, 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 so, and we've all heard the mantra, we're trying to do more with less, and that definitely is something that is very clearly impacting us within our personal lives, within our work lives, and our families are also in that. And, with a fight for funding and finances, there's, how do you make your productivity, how do you, keep yourself active and busy and financially stable and all that kind of good stuff. And then I think another hallmark is that we work with some of the most vulnerable members of our society. So these are the people who, have had kind of the worst of the worst happen to them. And so it just, some of those stories you just cannot let go of, and you probably will carry it with you for your entire career. So other red flags that are common to see in the workplace, increased errors, a natural avoidance, of certain types of families or issues. You might find in your team that there's a lack of collaboration, maybe some toxic negativity, where people's sense of humor have turned really, really dark and sarcastic to the point where it's kind of like, I don't know that that's really funny, so, but again, that's kind of how people tend to express that in, that dark place that they're at. And then also there's just the overall employee issues of tardiness, absenteeism, and I heard this term a couple years ago, presenteeism, where you're kind of in there physically, but the person's kind of checked out emotionally and just not really fully functional and really engaged in their work every day. So, my burning question, is, am I, experiencing brain damage on myself? Kind of evolved into, how do we keep this from happening to us? And, and also another caveat to that was, why doesn't everyone get burned out or have secondary trauma? Why are some people more immune to it than others? There are some people who, get burned out, have vicarious trauma, and are in and out of a job in, a couple of years, while other people are able to do it for 20, 30 years. What makes the difference between who is successful and who's not? So one of the key terms is resiliency, and the reason why I have this photo of all these rubber bands is I want this to be kind of an image to carry with you, that we all want to be those rubber bands. So if you think about kind of all the different varieties of rubber bands, there are some that are thicker than others, some that are more stretchy than others, some that could hold more containers and things like that. And you want to be able to be flexible in that way so that, when you have a stress, you can experience that tension like a rubber band, and you can stretch and you can deal with that and cope with that, and you're not going to snap and break. But at the same time, you also want to experience a period of time at rest where you're loose and flimsy like a rubber band, and you can kind of, feel that relaxed state and that lack of tension. And so, I think considering yourself, how do you become more like a rubber band, or how do you become more flexible in that way, or how do you find that balance so you can really live that life, because we all know, if you've had a rubber band in a state of tension wrapped around a bunch of papers or things, and it's been in a drawer for 20 years, and you pull it out, it's just going to crumble. And so that's kind of the exact opposite of what we want to strive for in our work. So this is an interesting resiliency quiz that I came across a few years ago, And you can definitely Google it when you get a chance. This, it's online, it's free, and I just kind of included the very beginning parts of it to kind of give you some idea of a flavor of what it includes. And they really kind of highlight 6 different kind of dimensions that you're really looking at taking care of from a resiliency standpoint. And, if you can answer, questions positively kind of in each of these different 6 domains, you can find, a good balance in terms of your resiliency. So you can either take it as a quiz to kind of tap to see where you are, kind of as an awareness activity or exercise, or if you just want to look at it to just give you some ideas of how do I start to incorporate some self-care strategies into my life. Do I have, elements of all of these, or at least a few elements from each segment in my current personal life and my work life and things. And I also want people to also think positively about this because, I definitely enjoy a lot of the information that's on the Center for the Developing Child by Harvard University. And one of the things that is included in there is that resilience can be strengthened at any age. So it's never too late to build it. We obviously focus a lot on building, resiliency in children, because then it's something they can carry with them throughout their life. But at the same time, if you're an adult and you're post-childhood, post age 18 or, even age 40, that's not the end of the world. You can still build that resilience at any age. So you can even be retired and be able to do things that will impact you positively and build your resilience over time. So there's one quick way to try to remember it is to consider your ABCs. So the first step is always building awareness, kind of finding where you fall, what are your strengths, your weaknesses in terms of compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and all those different things. The B stands for balance, so it can mean, finding a work-life balance, as well as finding, balances within different aspects of your work to kind of find a better, healthier place in terms of your job. And then the C for the ABCs is connection. This tends to be a very powerful tool, connection with ourselves, with others, and, also in particular with our spiritual self, or, if you think about spirituality in other terms of, having a connection to God or like a religious community. Those 3 things we can go into a little more depth. So awareness, there's several tools out there that kind of tap into it. The first one is probably the most well-studied, well-used tool out there. If you go to the proqual.org website, not only will you get the free questionnaire, but you will also get their manual and all their information that they've published about it, and it's been used across all sorts of different disciplines. So it's definitely not tied directly to mental health in any way. It's, can be used with nurses, with healthcare providers, with social workers, case managers, all sorts of different walks of life. The other 2 do have a little bit more of a mental health flavor to it, but it's not exceedingly so. I think any kind of caregiver person could, apply those questions to them. So, and on the next slide, again, I included just the beginning snapshot of what the ProQual looks like, and again, I kind of copied it right off their website and onto the slides, so it should give you kind of a good flavor of where they, put you, and then there's a pretty easy scoring that goes along with it. So you can, it probably takes about 5 minutes, maybe 10 to most, to take it and score it all together, depending on how much you kind of stop and reflect on each of the items. So the balance part, and there's a handout I'll talk about, is again talking about finding, all sorts of different types of self-care strategies to use. And I think another thing that I always hit home on is the importance of rest. And a lot of what I mean by that is taking regular vacations. I think we more and more are becoming a society of workaholics. And as a manager, of some pretty high functioning teams, I've had to really talk to several people about you need to schedule a vacation because it's been way too long, and you've got oodles of vacation time, saved up, so you have the ability to take it and get paid for. So let's do that because you need it. Everybody needs to rest. Other ideas around balance are, doing professional development, participating in trainings, making sure you feel like you're getting what you need to professionally grow in your role and learn. That's a very key thing, I think, for professionals in the healthcare field to really feel like they know what's new, what's coming out, and because there's new things being learned about all the time. And then the last thing I have on the slide here is, that it's important to vary your workload. So if that means kind of taking on different types of roles, or, trying to, take on some new sorts of activities, or maybe you're going to actually reduce some of your time, or maybe you're going to consider, talking to your human resources person about, maybe you want to do a job sharing kind of thing, or maybe it's time to transition into a different sort of position that might make use of a different type of skill that you have at your agency. There's lots of different things that different strategies that you can use in that way. So for me personally, doing these sorts of presentations is a great way for me to vary my workload. It's a different type of experience than what I have in my normal day-to-day work, and it's a chance for me to meet new people, to get out and see different places around the state, and so I've really enjoyed the chance to give these different sorts of talks. So, oops, sorry, a little technical difficulty there. So this is a self-care wheel that I spoke about first, and again, you can find this right on the olgaphoenix.com website, and it's really, I think, a good pictorial depiction of how you can choose any type of these different activities as a way to give yourself some balance and, exercise all sorts of different types of self-care. And I think, if you were to pick any one category, if you were to do the physical thing and really take care of yourself in your body, that's all well and good. But if you're avoiding dealing with other types of self-care, you might find yourself a little bit out of balance. And so I think it really highlights that we kind of need to spread it out and do a little bit of everything in order to really find that great balance. And you can definitely include additional lists on there. If you go to the website, there's actually a worksheet that you can print out, kind of a blank one like this, if you want to kind of develop your own self-care plan and kind of write in those things for you in the different pie pieces of what you would put down personally for yourself as a different sort of activity to put in each of those different categories. So again, just a kind of real cheap and easy tool that you can access and start to do some self-care work. So another thing that really called to me when I was doing some different readings around this is that the term the treadmill effect, and that I think, again, with the idea of doing more and more with less, we have this sense that we're on this treadmill and we're never stopping. And we can't say no, so we can't slow down the pace. We just got to keep going at that same speed, nonstop. And, just like if you were on a treadmill for the entire day, you would kind of feel pretty numb to it after a while. You'd probably not really be getting as much out of it as you initially would if you just did it kind of periodically throughout the day. One of the terms that kind of comes with that inability to say no is the heroic syndrome, that, it always feels good to be that person to say, yes, I can do that. I can stand up and, agree to take on this additional project, or, take on this other client that no one else seems to have time for, and I can kind of be the hero of that situation. And sometimes our good intentions can hurt us, and no has to become a part of our vocabulary. Even in these very tough times where there's a lot of pressure not to say no, those healthy boundaries are important. So, and it should be okay to be able to do that. So, and the last thing, I included a quote here under the connections section. Actually, there's a couple of quotes here that I wanted to include because I think they really highlight that, we are part of, as Chief Seattle says, this web of life, and whatever happens in the web impacts us. Whatever we do to other people or other things in the web, we're doing to ourselves, because we're all bound together and all things connect. And so just like we want to take care of our clients, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to take care of our own sense of humankind if we're really going to be effective caregivers. So one activity that we can kind of take a few seconds to do if you have a piece of scrap paper handy. It's called the 6 circles activity, and essentially you just do that simple thing on a piece of scrap paper, write down 6 circles, and in each circle you're going to fill in 3 people or things that are examples of that type of that category. And so just take a moment. And so the first category is to think of 3 supportive colleagues in your immediate work environment. So 3 people that you would consider to be kind of your go-to person who could talk to you or help you vent or give you advice, and they're kind of right there, in a moment's notice or, within your normal workday. The second category would be supportive colleagues who may not necessarily be in your immediate work environment. Maybe these are people that you went to school with and are working at another agency or organization across town, or maybe there's somebody you can email and ask questions about, somebody who you could, again, seek some advice from, vent a little bit, talk about your workday, and who would kind of get it because they are doing something pretty similar to you. The third category, which I really like, is to think of 3 friends that you do not talk shop with. So these are the people that, when you're out with them socially, you don't naturally fall into talking about work. That's not the only thing you talk to them about. In fact, it's not one of the things that you talk about. You talk about, family, you talk about politics or sports or, any kind of news of the day or, things that you're thinking about maybe in your career in terms of goals or things like that, but you're not just talking to talk about the workday and event. The fourth category would be who you might consider to be mentors for yourself. So people that you look up to, people that you would want to imitate, or maybe somebody whose career that you have followed or would be interested in kind of following in their footsteps, either at your current location, or it could be anywhere, anybody doing really anything. It could be just people that you admire, historical figures, things like that. Then category 5 would be activities that you do just for you. So these aren't things that you have to do. Things are things that you want to do. Things that bring you joy. Things that fill you up emotionally, spiritually, and give you a sense of pleasure, and that aren't really necessarily related to work or other personal responsibilities. And then the last category would be experiences that you've had of beauty or joy. So 3 things that really brought you a sense of awe and wonder, or a sense of just overwhelming happiness throughout the course of your life. So, and hopefully, my hope is for everybody that in each of these categories, you've had at least 3 things to write in there, if not more. You could always add more if you find that you have more things to write in that. But if there's any categories that are empty or only maybe have 1 thing, those will be an area that you could concentrate on developing. So if you don't have any friends that you don't talk shop with, that all your friends are people that you work with or who work in the same field as you, then maybe that's something to consider, is how do you get out of that, or how do you set limits with those friends that you work with, that you're not going to talk about work, when you go over to their house to, for a party or get together, or, you're not going to just meet up and talk about the same thing that you started to talk about earlier in the day. And then it's not just a continuation of work. So, and again, I think, for many of us, finding activities that you do just for you is probably one of the toughest, because, as caregivers, we are always focused on others, and it's hard just to focus on what do we do just for us, and it can feel selfish and self-centered and egotistical and narcissistic and all those different things that we can label it on so that we kind of avoid doing those things. But in fact, those activities for yourself are just as important as anything you do for other people. So some different questions to ponder related to connections are, listed here. I'm not going to go through all of them because there's pretty long lists, but, I like different elements of, like, the last one there, who helps keep you centered and gives you strength, people that bring you joy and happiness. How do you communicate with people? How do you connect with people and reflect on the things going on in your life, and all these different things. So these are all just kind of tools to kind of help you reflect and ponder on, again, how do you build those connections and maintain them. Another activity that I can walk you through is, and I've used this one as one of my team meetings with our group as a way to kind of stir some conversation up around this. It's called the relationship pie. So again, you start with just one circle, and then you basically fill in a pie chart by estimating a portion of time each week that you spend with each person or a group of people. So, if you had to break it down, what percentage of time do you spend with clients? Is it 25%, 50%? How much time do you spend with your coworkers and your friends and your family, or people in your church or any kind of social group or community group that you're involved in? And then if there are any other relationships that fall outside those categories, you can definitely include those too and make note of them and the percentages of how you break them out. And I think it's important for people to kind of really be honest, like how much time you're spending kind of in those different areas. And maybe it's not how much time you're spending with people, maybe it's how much time you're spending about that person. So maybe you're not in a session with a client or in their home, providing a service to them, but are you documenting information about them? Are you looking up resources for them for your next meeting? Are you, kind of spending a lot of time around, trying to help them out and things like that? So kind of in thinking about each of those, pieces of that pie, just trying to estimate that time. And then, once you've kind of made those determinations of where to draw those lines, it's just an opportunity for you to, again, reflect and consider, is this how you want your pie to look, as you divvy out portions of yourself to people? Is there an area where you should give somebody else a bigger piece of the pie or a smaller piece of the pie? And how do you want to, where do you want to make those cuts, I guess, for lack of a better term. So.
And Dr. Rowling, we do have a few questions, actually. Okay. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
We go through
yeah.
those?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Just going to go closer to the speaker here so everyone can hear. So the first question is, what are 2 or 3 activities to include in my routine that I can add to my day to practice self-care?
Mm-hmm.
So some examples of self-care activities.
Okay.
And then the other one is the red flags that you described for secondary trauma and burnout sound similar to the symptoms of anxiety or depression. Is there a relationship there?
Okay.
Those are just a couple.
Yep, those are great questions. And actually, I'll probably be getting to the first one in a couple of slides, so I'll save that that answer for when we get to that section. As for the red flags, sounding quite a bit like anxiety and depression, I think that definitely is very true. And when you're talking about secondary trauma, again, that's where it kind of really starts to look more like true PTSD, because you had such an overwhelming experience of that trauma. And so it is, definitely something where you're going to experience some anxiety, some anxiousness, some depression, numbing, loss of interest and pleasure, and things like that. And so we all know that anxiety and depression and trauma kind of all go hand in hand. And so there definitely is a relationship. And just like for if you had, a diagnosis of anxiety or depression from a mental health provider, you would, take appropriate steps in that way. And that's, again, something I'll speak towards the end. But if that's something, those symptoms are something you really have, and they're experiencing in your day-to-day life, then that's definitely something you need to get help for. Whether that means contacting, the EAP for your organization, or reaching out through your insurance to get connected with a mental health provider, or talk to your primary care doctor or a psychiatrist about potential for medication, or any of those things definitely would be appropriate for that level of symptomatology. So because that's, again, crossing kind of that threshold of what's something that you could kind of handle on your own versus what you really need some outside help and intervention for. And for some people, that definitely is the case. And again, what we would say to our clients is that you're having a normal reaction to a very abnormal situation, a huge stressor that's happened in your life. And so there are ripple effects of that impact every person really that comes into contact with that individual, and that would include you as the caregiver. So definitely I would definitely take stock of that, and not take, I guess, to step away from the shame that might come with that, and that, even helpers at times need help from other people. So, and I really want to point this out too, that there is a huge catch-22 in that when we are need self-care the most, we are the least motivated to use it. So there's this bind that, if we were doing good self-care on an ongoing basis, and we were, really resilient and all that kind of stuff, the motivation would be there because we're doing it. But when we're not, kind of getting started is can be pretty intensely challenging. And just like we see with the clients and the families that we work with, it's that start and stop and start and stop. But as long as you continue to start every time that you stop, it's not a failure. So, and I really like this quote from the Buddha, that you yourself, as much as anyone in the universe, deserve your love and affection. And so it's really tapping into the idea of self-empathy, self-compassion. And self-compassion is kind of a newer word to really talk a lot about self-care, and kind of highlight the fact that it's not just the mechanics of, taking care of yourself. It's having compassion for yourself as a human being the way you would for any other human being. And so, I just wanted to kind of take a second to highlight that as part of this, because I think sometimes we have to step out of the role of caregiver to think about ourselves as people first, and that, just as any person needs compassion, needs empathy, we too need that, and we need to take care of the human part of ourselves first and foremost, rather than just thinking of ourselves as a provider or as a caregiver for someone else. So one of the gurus in the area of trauma and vicarious trauma is Laura Vandernoot Lipsky, and she, when I saw her speak at the beginning of the year, I stole this from her because I thought it really kind of hit home as to kind of how we go about doing this. And she found this term, it's a theory kind of around the aggregation of marginal gains. And the example she used was actually from the British cycling team, that their coach kind of used this principle that if we, look at what we're doing, because they hadn't won, a Tour de France, in umpteen years or whatever, that if we make, all these little tweaks, 1% improvement here, 1% improvement here, and we kind of just continue to hone in over time, all these changes, then we will really get ourselves positioned to that. He thought, within 5 years we'd be able to win the Tour de France as a team. And so, but in reality, I guess from the story, and I could be remembering some of the details wrong, it was that they won it within 3 years or something actually even shorter than that. So it kind of spoke to the acceleration part of it, that once you start to do it, it does get easier, and the amount of improvement that you see starts to build and accumulate upon itself. And so it's really kind of the idea of like compounding interest in kind of the finance world. And so, and likewise, there is, it does go the negative way. So over time, if you show 1% less amount of work that you're doing, you're not going to maintain your same level of output or success. It'll gradually really start to taper off and decline, and then eventually you'll see a big dip over time because of that compounded impact of those 1% changes. And another quote, so be faithful in the small things, because in them, it is in them that strength lies. So Mother Teresa, definitely focused her life on, making those small changes in the lives of the people that she worked with, and that she wasn't out there for the fame and the glory, but it was about each individual person that she interacted with. And so here's, just a quick visual for, all sorts of different little activities that you can include in your routine as ways to take a break for yourself. And, some of them are kind of silly. I don't know how many people are going to go and climb a tree. But the coloring with crayons is starting to make a big comeback, with the adult coloring books and things like that. Meditation is definitely a great way to take a break for yourself. Watching a funny video or something on YouTube, or going to a farmer's market, going outside. Never underestimate the power of sunshine and fresh air. Definitely can help about any situation out. And so just a few little examples of different things to do. So other quick examples of different activities. One is an ear rubbing exercise that we'll touch on the next slide. There's something that I came across was the idea of soothing touch. And that was the idea that, anytime you touch somebody or put your hand on their shoulder, give them a hug, rub their arm in any way, it does set off, different types of endorphins and, chemical reactions within our physical body. And so it's kind of the idea that if we can do that for someone else, why can't we do that for ourselves? So, even just putting your arms around yourself and kind of rubbing your arms, or putting your hand over your heart, or, things along those lines, as a way to kind of give yourself that same sort of chemical boost, is a way to practice good self-care. Deep breathing and relaxation exercises are huge. Mindfulness meditations, there's all sorts of research on, the positive impacts of those. I also encourage people to gauge all your senses. So one of the things that for myself I personally found helpful is I had a friend whose he works at Steinhoffel's, the furniture store, and I don't know, they put together all these little lavender packets with their logo on it and everything. I don't know if they give them out with people when they buy new dressers or bedroom furniture or whatever. But she had some extras, so she gave them out to us one day when we were all out for dinner. And I kind of kept that, and I actually keep it in my office. So when I have a stressful phone conversation with somebody, or, just get an email that, gets my blood pressure going or something like that, I try to take a moment, take a little sniff of the lavender packet, get that, smell to kind of, because it's an automatically relaxing thing for me to kind of, refocus myself and, focus on my physical body. And any kind of physical activity that you can do to kind of purge negative feelings, walking, working out, yoga, all that kind of stuff are great self-care activities. And then I also included some different transformational imagery that can oftentimes be helpful as well. So the raising energy level exercise is kind of corny, but it works. And so I've, again, used it with a few groups, and people are always kind of a little surprised that it actually worked. So the first thing is to take your index finger and your thumb and rub the cartilage of your ears. So kind of do both ears at the same time. And you can start at the bottom and make sure you're rubbing the cartilage, not just the lobe or the flabby part of your ear. And so gently roll it between your fingers and your thumb, kind of over and over again. And move up your ear and rub the cartilage all the way around your ear, including the little piece of cartilage in the front of your ear. And just kind of do that for, a few seconds or so, kind of rotate around. And when you finish, you can take your hands away from your ears, and you'll notice that your ears will be feeling pretty warm, maybe even a little on the hot side. And essentially what we just did in that activity was to stimulate the energy points in your ears. And so there's a lot of acupuncturists, acupressure folks who have talked about how, the ears, feet, and hands have all these nerve endings that touch every part of our body. And so their goal is to stimulate those points precisely with needles or acupressure or different things like that. And so we just did it without that same level of precision. And so hopefully what people will start to notice is that your general energy after this little, 2-minute activity will be a little higher, and also that you would feel a little bit calmer too, as a way of doing this. And so again, it feels kind of corny and weird, but it's just a quick and easy way to, again, give yourself a little boost, take a few minutes, in hopefully a relatively private space so people don't look at you weird for rubbing your ears, but you can just find a way to do that. Maybe if you're, out there in the community doing home visits, in between appointments, you pull over in your car and you start rubbing your ears somewhere just for, again, a few minutes to give yourself a little recharge. So this meditation is one that I've was introduced to a couple of years when we were at a retreat, and I thought it was very appropriate because it talks about a lot of the self-care philosophies of treating yourself with loving kindness, and also touches a bit on, the trauma reaction of being safe, letting yourself know that you're safe from inner and outer danger, and that you want to be well in body and mind, so a very holistic feel. And then obviously the goal at the end is that you want to be at ease and happy. And so again, all those things tie in with positive self-care and relate back to, our experiences of vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. So again, it's something that, it's just a quick little thing. You can print it up, tape it onto your computer, or, put it on your bulletin board or your calendar or something like that. And, something you can kind of just remind yourself of, every day, or, once a week if you have kind of a time that you do meditations. And there's tons and tons and tons of meditation mantras out there, and different ways to practice mindfulness and things like that. So, if you incorporate this, or if you find something else that you really enjoy or that really speaks to you, you know, more power to you. So it's just, like I said, one that I came across that really seemed to tap into these concepts well. So, and then, you know, imagery is been a tool within the mental health field for a long time to kind of really highlight, you know, how, you know, the mind and the real world, you know, there's not all that much distinction in many cases. And so using imagery to kind of teach yourself or unteach yourself things can be helpful. You know, we use this a lot in sports psychology, you know, with athletes, you know, trying to imagine themselves shooting a free throw, or making, you know, Mason Crosby doing a, you know, his field goal in last weekend's game twice. You know, I'm sure those were things that he had done imagery about, you know, umpteen times, you know, in the locker room and on the practice field and things. So, you know, there is definitely a powerful impact of that. So one example, you know, of a way to kind of help you relax and deal with some of the tension, you know, would be, you know, to imagine that you're a tight rope, and then it's slowly unraveling, you know, and all that tension is being released. You know, also other imageries I've come across would be, you know, imagining, you know, and this is, I think, one that speaks well to Wisconsin winter, imagining, you know, this field of cold trees and snow and wind blowing and all this stuff evolving into a nice, warm, sunny, sandy beach with palm trees and, you know, the beautiful smell of salt water from the ocean and all of those different things that we don't get so much in our winters here. But, you know, any other things kind of along those lines that you can kind of start to do, just a, you know, 2-minute imagery exercise to find a way to train your brain to relax and to let go of the stress and the tension that you carry around, because that's automatically wrapped up into so much of what we experience with trauma. So the hyperarousal element of it is has a huge impact on us physically. So other steps and different things. Probably about 6 months ago, I came across with a work group that I was in. It's an app. It's called Provider Resilience, and it's free. It's actually set up and geared towards people who work in the substance abuse field, but there's a lot of things on it that are just more generic. So I think anybody in a caregiving, helping sort of profession could definitely benefit from. It actually has the ProQual kind of self-assessment tool built into it. It also has a time clock in there that tells you, it counts down the number of days since your last vacation. And it gives you then an overall rating score, you know, as to, you know, where you are falling in your overall resilience. So whether you're kind of on the good end or the not so good end, and, you know, is it time to kick into gear, some different self-care activities. They also have, I think, on there some more quotes and, you know, positive uplifting things to read about, and different things along those lines. So, and there may well be other apps out there similar to that. I'm not a huge techie app type person, so I'm not really up on all of what's out there, but that was one that came across that really seemed to kind of fit well for you know, the type of trauma work that my team does. And so I've just been sharing that around in different presentations as well. So I know there's apps that around mindfulness meditations and different relaxation activities and all those different things. So, you know, if you're somebody who does, you know, utilize apps a lot, you know, there's tons and tons that you could tap into. So one thing that we've tried to incorporate at Children's and the team that I'm a part of now is to do an annual retreat. And I was mentioning to the team here, you know, we get away from the office. We usually go to a park or someplace outdoors. You know, they usually have like some sort of activity room there where we can do, you know, some art kind of things, or maybe do like a team building game or something like that. You know, usually we try to do it, you know, during the summer when we can actually go outside for a hike and, you know, be outdoors and, you know, do some fun things together. And it's really been, I think, a very helpful thing for our team to do that on a regular basis, and for people to know that, we're going to do this pretty much every year like clockwork, and different things like that. But, if you can find ways to build in group activities like that in any kind of way, no matter how often it is, or, what type of activity, it doesn't have to be a full day sort of thing, to kind of escape. And not everybody can arrange that for a whole team, especially if you're a lot of people doing community-based work and everybody's out and about all the time. But if there's some way that you could bring your group together, your team together, to do some joint activities, it can be very powerful, because a lot of what people need to hear is the validation from other people doing the same work that, yes, it's stressful, yes, it sucks, yes, this is hard. And so that really helps to open the door for people to do more self-care. Other ideas, yoga classes, meditation, getting a trainer, seeing your doctor for a physical. Different agencies and organizations have employee assistance programs that you can tap into, whether it's, seeing a therapist for yourself, or, just connecting to all sorts of different types of services that will somehow make your life easier. They do all sorts of different things for the clients that they work with. And then I mentioned earlier, if you are having true secondary traumatic stress syndrome, psychotherapy is definitely an option for that. Medication management, more intensive services are definitely needed for that. And then the last thing I want to include is one that none of the managers ever want me to talk about, but is that, as you do this work, it's always good to have a plan B. Because if you find yourself getting sucked into burnout and vicarious trauma and all that kind of stuff, and you can't get yourself back on track, then you shouldn't be doing this work anymore, because it's just going to continue to be damaging to you, and it's going to spill over and be damaging for your clients. And it's just, it's always good to know that this is a free choice that you have. You could do A or B. You don't have to do just A, this, and so this is a choice every day that you have to work in the field that you work in, to work at the organization that you work at. And, the plan B may never not be, the ultimate of all plans, but it is still a choice. And some people do choose to walk away, and that's okay. So, but we also can choose to, come to work every day. So, and then it looks like we have a couple more questions.
Yes. Couple questions. How can I implement this within my staff? So I think this is someone coming from a management position or coordination position. How would you recommend introducing some of these activities? Maybe if there's not buy-in within the staff that it's needed, or recognition of that. Mm-hmm. And then also kind of along that same line, if they want to incorporate it into their work life, what would your suggestions be for getting buy-in from management to make this a priority? Is there any other evidence that you can share other than saying, I need to do this to feel better?
Oh, great question. I think it takes a little while to build this into a group culture. Especially if you are managing a team of more than just a couple of people. Because, again, avoidance being a very strong traumatic response, when you start to, again, encourage people to talk about it, their natural tendency is to avoid it. And so I would say acknowledging that up front with them and kind of naming that for them, that, I understand this is going to be hard, and people's natural tendency is not to want to deal with this, and all that kind of stuff can be helpful. But I would say to keep plugging away at it and trying to give them the message that it's not going to go away, it's not the flavor of the day. And one tool that can be helpful, if you do have smaller, tight-knit groups, is to actually, in a way, delegate it out to the group. That if you can get them to say, okay, this is something that would be worthwhile to do, give them the ownership. And maybe, you can offer some different activities to them or some different ideas, but they really kind of need to come up with an overall plan and to implement it on a regular basis. And so I did that when I was in our smaller office in Racine, and I kind of was a participant in the group, and I came up with a couple of ideas myself, but, pretty much everybody in the group, kind of rotated, who was going to come up with the self-care idea of the month, because we did it on a monthly basis in that team. And so that, I think, really helped take away from the fact that this was your boss telling you to do it. It was, this is what we want to do for ourselves. In terms of how to get your job and your leader team to buy into this, my argument would be to talk to them on their level about it, and maybe even loop in your human resources folks and say, what is our turnover rate here? How many people have left the agency over the last year, or how many people, are kind of in that low performing end of the spectrum? And what if we could turn that around? Because, and we were talking about this earlier over lunch, that, it really is about keeping down the costs of, every time somebody leaves, and you have to hire someone new, and then you have to train them, and then, there's a period of time before they're fully up to full potential in terms of clients and, billing and all that kind of stuff. And so if you can minimize that for an organization of any size, you're going to be helping out your bottom line on your program, for your organization, for all those things. And so I would kind of speak their language about that and really get them to buy in that way. And I think as long as you can get some champions, higher up in the organization, I think that will help a big difference. And I was sharing too earlier that it's actually our CEO for Children's, one of her mantras that I've heard repeatedly over the time that she's been in our organization, that the client, where she uses the term patient because she's a former nurse, the patient experience cannot exceed the employee experience. So again, we're all about, patient satisfaction, the client experience, all those things, are very hot topics out there in the field, because it's what helps us kind of stand out against other competitors and things like that. And so I really kind of turn it on to that if you want your, client satisfaction, your patient experience scores to improve, this is one big way to do that, is to get your employees at that higher level as well. So, so those would be kind of two suggestions that I would have. And then, if try it, and if it doesn't work, and the culture is resistant to that, again, you may be dealing with an overall cultural trauma within that organization. And so, again, that would be something that you would have to stop and think about as choice. Is this something that I can stick with and work with and try to, keep at kind of the grassroots sorts of changes, implementing things in smaller teams and having it kind of become a more gradual part of the culture? Or do I look at a different agency who does buy into this more and actually implement these different ideas and encourage people to do it? So it's a tough call, and there's a lot of great organizations out there that convince themselves that they're just too busy to do any of this kind of stuff, and it's sad. And that's where you kind of look at that aggregation of marginal gains over time. That's, some agencies are going to hit their stride and really see some big improvements and become leaders in their field, and others are going to slowly die off because they're not doing all the things that they need to do to keep themselves competitive. So, but these are great questions. And I'm not sure where we are on time. But
about 15 minutes.
15 minutes? Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to do another activity with folks called the toxic waste dump. And actually I have a couple, probably this one and another one, but I don't have a slide for the other one that I thought would be helpful for people. And again, these would just be some activities that you could either do individually, or you could, if you're a manager and you want to bring this into a team meeting or a group retreat or something like that. These are all pretty easy to follow through and implement. And so the toxic waste dump, the when, you can implement it in kind of more dramatic ways. Like I've had the book that I got this out of, they talked about having this giant plastic container with, these danger and high voltage and biohazard kind of signs all over it. And then you set the big container in the middle of the room and so forth. But for my team, I kind of kept it simple. I just put some labels on a manila envelope so that people could kind of put it in and feel like it was being put away. It didn't work for our team setting to have a big garbage recycling bin kind of thing in the middle of our room. But you can kind of tailor it however you want to do. If you have a flair for the dramatic and actually have the resources to make it happen, feel free to knock yourself out. There's definitely something to be said for going big or going home. So, because sometimes that kind of taking it out on a limb can actually break up give people the permission to really kind of to go with it and engage in the activity. So essentially, you can give them a sheet of paper, if you want to have different things, different signs on there, or if they just want to give them a blank piece of paper with instructions on it, you can do that too. But essentially what you want them to do is to get some of that toxic stuff out of them onto the paper. So they can do that by either drawing a painful feeling or a symptom, or writing down a story about a client, or some sort of ugly truth that they've encountered throughout their work, or some sort of defeating belief that may be related to their trauma and their clients and things like that. Whatever that toxic stuff is, if they can get it out onto this piece of paper, and then, as a ritual at the end of that time frame, you would have them then put the toxic story or drawing or whatever and symbolically throw it away into, if you have the big dumpster thing, great. If you like I did, put it into an envelope and then put it into the shredding bin, you can do that too. It doesn't have to be super fancy, but if, like I said, if you think that would be helpful to your team, you can definitely go that way. So if you want to take a few minutes and just kind of think about that for yourself, because I encourage you to try all these things. If you're a leader and you want to do this with your team, I would do this yourself first, so you kind of have that feeling of what it would be like for your team to do this and how hard it may be or how easy it may be, and give it a whirl yourself, because I don't usually try to ask people to do things I wouldn't do myself or haven't done myself. So just take a few minutes and think about some aspect of your work, and what are some of the painful feelings about it, or, like I said, an unbearable story, an ugly truth, or some sort of defeating belief, and just write it down. And if you have a trash can in your office where you are and you want to just rip it up and throw it in there, great. If you want to stick it into your shredder or take it home with you and dispose of it that way, that's fine too. So, but again, the idea is to do a purge for yourself emotionally and mentally. So, and then the last activity that I wanted to share is basically a lifeline activity. And so the instructions would be, again, if you have a blank piece of paper, to draw out a line, and the starting point would be whatever point in your life that you knew that this was the work that you wanted to do. So whether you were in high school and you thought, oh, I want to be a nurse or a doctor, or you were later on in your college career, or maybe you had a job change later in life, whatever that starting point is for you, that would be the left end of the line. And then the right end of the line would be today, where we are, 2017. And then on the top part of the line, to break up that timeline, you would note all the kind of professional changes that happened in your life during that time frame. So, if you graduated from college or a graduate program, or if you got your first job or changed jobs, or worked with this really excellent mentor, or had an internship that really was memorable to you, or kind of however you want to kind of mark some of those professional changes, or maybe you lost a job. It could be a negative change, and something kind of forced you to rethink your career or something like that. You can definitely note all of those on the sheet as well. And then on the bottom, that's where you mark all of the changes in your personal life that happened during that same time frame. So whether you got married, had a child, experienced a death in your family, or loss of a friend, maybe you moved, maybe you, had some other kind of large personal change of some sort, that, you got divorced, all sorts of different things could fall into that category. And you just kind of mark those out, and when did those happen according to the timeline. And then once you've kind of got those professional and personal timelines kind of mapped out, the last element is that to think about all of the clients and families and patients that you've worked with, and the ones that are sticking with you. So, for example, personally, I will never ever forget the very first teenager that I had to hospitalize because of suicidal ideation. I had to I actually did it twice over the course of her treatment. And the first time was easier. The second time, she kind of shut down. She went safety plan with me, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I will never ever forget that experience. And so she's definitely somebody I would mark on that timeline when I saw her, and in relative to my professional life and my personal life and all the different things that were going on at that time frame. And then every other client that again, either positive or negative, that either you will remember them because they were your favorite client of all time, or they were just struggled in some way that just haunts you. Wherever they fall in that continuum, if you have people who fall into that category, I want you to kind of sprinkle them in wherever they would kind of fall on that timeline. And then as you do that, and you probably are starting to feel some of those residual feelings of those clients and of those experiences that you've kind of laid out on your timeline, both professional and personal, I want you to kind of reflect on where things fall, how they're lumped together, how spread out they are, and what kind of connections you can make between the things that happened for you personally, the things that happened to you professionally, the things that happened with clients. And the whole premise is that they are all connected, because we're humans, and our personal lives and our professional lives are tied in together, and our clients that impacted us at work or impacting us at home or impacting us personally, because obviously we're including those people because they are meaningful to us in some way, shape, or form. And so those people changed us, just like we as providers may have changed them for the better or the worse. They've also changed us in some way, shape, or form. Maybe they were an extremely tough person to work with, and we learned some skills in terms of how do we deal with this type of issue in a more appropriate way or more effective way. Or like I said, maybe it's your favorite client of all time, and you saw such tremendous growth and change and positive stuff. It kind of reinstilled your sense of humanity, and gave you all sorts of sense of professional hope and growth. And so there's a lot of different ways to kind of see how people, have evolved over the course of their careers and their time. So, okay. Well, that's kind of the last activity that I wanted to share with you guys, and I just wanted to kind of do a short summary to say, these just kind of, again, going back to the terms, vicarious trauma, secondary traumatic stress, compassion fatigue, burnout, are real issues that have a real impact on individuals and the overall work environment. And then there's several tools that people can use to help them assess themselves, to build that awareness. But essentially, the ongoing work is the key. So knowing your ABCs, to develop a disciplined approach, developing self-care and building your resilience. And then also, one of the reasons why I didn't touch on this so much today, but one of the things I like about the ProQual is that it taps into compassion satisfaction. So the satisfaction of your job. And so really finding ways to remember those positives as well. So, and again, in the last timeline activity, thinking about those clients who really did, impact you positively and left you in a better place too, and changed you for the better. So as a way to kind of really remember and tap into the benefits of the work that you do. So with that, I'll just take the last couple of questions, and then we will be wrapped up.
Yeah, so the first question, and actually this wasn't written down, but it was texted in, is what would be kind of the main 3 takeaways, the main 3 messages that you would share after everything that we've learned, because there were so many wonderful activities. I did the circle one actually while I was sitting here. And I think it's just kind of nice to have, what are my 3 steps that you would really encourage everyone to do this afternoon, this evening, tomorrow?
Well, I think it depends on if your approach is going to be as a leader to do this with your team, or as a personal thing that you want to do for yourself. And if it's a personal thing that you're going to do for yourself, as your personal self-care thing, would be to kind of come up with a plan. And I mean, I listed all sorts of activities, and these are examples that I've used, that people I know that I've used, but this is not an exhaustive list. And so figuring out what for you is what's going to make the difference, what gives you that boost, what gives you that positive, sort of recharge, and then really creating kind of that tailored list for yourself, and then giving yourself permission to do it, I think, is a big step too, because that was something I saw with my team, is that I had some people kind of come to me and say, well, I don't know that I have, permission to watch a 5-minute, meditation video at my computer when I'm in between clients. I'm like, why do you need my permission to do that? Because, that's something that you should feel free to be able to do for yourself. If you're making, personally and professionally sound decision of how to use your time, I'm not going to question that. And at the same time, I don't want to dictate to you as your boss what your personal self-care plan is going to be, because for some people it's going to be totally different, and not everybody fits into the same category. And for a group, it's really kind of getting to know the group and getting to understand what are they going to respond to well, and what place are they starting from. Like when I came to the Milwaukee office, I was in a very stressed out place, and I came to a very stressed out team for different reasons. And it took a long time before we kind of got in the groove that, I was where they were at, and, things were jiving in terms of the types of activities and things that we were doing. And it just took a lot of chipping away and persistence, and them getting the message that, we're going to keep talking about this, and it's important, and we're going to, keep plugging away until we can get to a better place together. And now I have a lot more buy-in, and, I personally don't plan the retreats. We have a retreat committee who kind of does it together as a group and gets really excited about it and comes up with different ideas each time. And, so really kind of, again, giving people ownership of it, whether it's a group or as an individual. And again, that sense of failure, that, what's good enough and all that stuff, I think kind of that would be my third step, is really tapping into that. I was at a conference where somebody acknowledged that because she's always heard that in order to really get maximum benefit, you have to work out for at least 20 minutes. Well, she doesn't have 20 minutes, then what's the point? And it's like, well, why not go for a walk for 5 minutes or 10 minutes? you're still going to get some benefit out of that. It may not be that you reach your maximum cardio, kind of level, but you're at least getting your body moving, you're maybe getting yourself outside if it's a nice day, different things like that. So trying to weed through some of those extra critical, self-thoughts, I think, giving yourself permission to do, to find a good starting point and go from there is helpful. And just acknowledge that, as caregivers, we're horrible at taking care of ourselves, and it's going to be a struggle, and just acknowledging that from day one. I've been trying to work at this for a long time, but I'm not perfect. I, still have a hard time saying no to stuff. I still, have a hard time not getting stressed out at different points throughout the year. August for me is just always going to be a horrible month because of budgets, times, and, United Way reports and stuff like that. But, I can plan for that, and I can, plan a vacation in July so that I can try to come at that month of August in a better place. So it's just a lot of little things. And like I said, that's why I really wanted to highlight that theory of aggregation of marginal gains. If you can just make those 1% changes, here and there, they do build up and they do start to accumulate and make a real difference. So.
Absolutely. And then there have been a few questions. People have been interested if the slides in your presentation will be available. Mm-hmm. So that's wonderful. So Dr. Rowling will be willing to share those. And then for those of you who have tuned in with us, if you know anyone who wasn't able to tune in, we are recording this session, and it will be available through our YouTube channel, Wisconsin Women's Health. So keep up to date with our e-newsletters and announcements on that if you know anyone that would like to see it, or if you'd like to view it again at a later date as well. Mm-hmm. So just kind of to finish up, I know we've just got a minute left or so. One final thought, one final question is, can you help address the following barrier that we might think to ourselves in regard to self-care, which is, I don't have time for self-care. Mm-hmm. Taking care of myself might take away from the care of someone else.
Mm-hmm. And I would go back to the very beginning of the presentation and the idea of the saw and sharpening the saw. And that's actually from the I forget the name of that book, The 7 Ingredients of a Highly Functional Person or something.
Yeah.
And, the story is somebody's out there, trying to saw wood and just struggling and working, and, somebody comes along and advises them, you should probably stop and sharpen your saw. You'd be able to get it done quicker. And it's like, oh, I don't have time. And, there's a famous quote from Abe Lincoln, who was also big into sawing wood, that if he had 7 hours to saw a pile of wood, he would spend the first 6 hours sharpening his saw. And so it's really that concept that by keeping yourself at your best, that's when you're going to be able to do your best work for your clients and for your families. Because if you're burnt out, if you're overworked, if you're exhausted, if you're always running late because, you're just kind of always frazzled and you can't get yourself organized because you're just, so far gone, that's not going to give your clients the best experience of your service. And they're going to get less out of it and less of you, a less helpful part of you than they would if you did try to implement this. And again, it goes back to setting boundaries, which is something a lot of our families need to learn for themselves as well. And so, again, how are they going to learn that from us if we're not, living that and showing them how do you do that? How do you say no? How do you say, I can't take this thing on at this point in time, or this is too much? And, so all those things, that we want our families to be able to do, we have to be able to do that for ourselves. So.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thank you to Dr. Rowling for joining us. I learned so much today. I know it was wonderful for our partners as well. If you guys do have any final questions, if you're still typing them up or thinking them up, please go ahead and submit them. Send them in an email, whatever you choose to do, and we'll be sure to make sure that they are followed up on. And just want to say thank you again. Happy New Year to everyone. And hopefully this evening or this afternoon you can rub your earlobes a little bit, or I actually did that activity as well. So, but I think Dr. Rowling gave us some really great examples that we can incorporate into our own lives for self-care, and we'll really encourage you as our program partners to do that in the new year. So,
Thank you.
yes, absolutely. Thank you, everyone.